And we're live. Well, Bryce, thank you so much for coming all the way to coastal Virginia to talk about Baksberg wines. Really excited, mostly because I love the wines. I love the family story. I love the fact that it's South Africa, and I think South Africa is kind of on the forefront of innovation right now. And I love what this family specifically is doing. So thank you for coming out here. I'm glad to have you here. So cheers.
Cheers. Thank you for having me. It's great to be back down in Virginia Beach, and I'm glad that the weather turned around at the end of the week. It was pretty icy when I arrived, and coming from South Africa, I'm obviously not used to that. So seeing all that ice and that snow climbing into the car was pretty petrifying.
Yes, yes. And now it's 70 degrees outside.
I know,
so
it's beautiful.
That's Virginia for you. So, well, I'd love to first tell everyone what we're drinking. First to start, it's this Baksberg. It's their Kosher Brut 2008 vintage here from South Africa. Very excited. All of these wine, the labels will be in the show notes in the comments below. So stay tuned later afterwards to see that. But I'd love, while we sip on this, if you could tell us the really, really phenomenal story of the Baksberg family estate.
Sure. So, I mean, yeah, it's pretty cool to be able to kind of work from a repertoire of, I think it's 106 years now. So they were established in 1916 by a Jewish refugee who was fleeing oppression out of Lithuania. The legend kind of has it that he was actually meant to get on a boat going to Canada, but found himself on the wrong ship and landed in South Africa. So, I mean, he was up the creek right from the get-go.
Yeah.
So about 21 years ago, the family decided that they wanted to start producing a range of kosher wines to kind of pay tribute to the Jewish roots of the family. So the brut that we're drinking now is not just a traditional method sparkling wine, it's also a kosher traditional method sparkling wine. It's also the only kosher traditional method sparkling wine made in South Africa, which is super cool. As you, of course, well know, traditional method sparkling wine in South Africa is called Method Klassiek, or MCC. And in order for a wine to be an MCC, you have to have it made from your traditional champagne varieties. So this one is 50% Chardonnay, 50% Pinot Noir, and you have to have it in bottle for that secondary fermentation for a minimum of 12 months before you can disgorge. So this one is pretty much on the button at 12 months. We take it out, we top it up, we put the closure on, we send it out to the market. So nice and fresh, very fruity, very approachable. It's not something that I recommend people hold it for super fancy celebrations. I personally like to use it for celebrating every day of the week, especially the last day of the week, Friday.
I like that. Well, it is Friday, so I support that.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us what goes into making kosher wine, and specifically this one is Meshaval kosher, is that right?
Exactly, yeah. So you'll find kind of all over the world, there's a lot of different places that are making kosher wine. Israel is super duper up and coming as well as a wine region in its own right, in addition to a lot of the Bordeaux Cru Classé who have been doing it for a while as well. But what you can often find is wine will be kosher, but there's a couple different tiers to it. So you have kosher wine, then you have wine that is also kosher for Passover. So for people who are not familiar with kind of what that entails is at the start of the Passover festival every year, Jewish families will have what you call a Seder dinner. And if you are not in Israel at the time of the Seder, you're required to host the Seder over 2 evenings. And during the Seder dinners, you are required to drink 4 cups of wine per person. So
I like this Passover.
I know it sounds pretty good, right? So if you're having that and you're drinking the wine, you want to have good wine. So historically, there weren't a whole bunch of good kosher wines around. But then, as we're talking about now, it's slowly starting to get a lot better. But not all wine is actually kosher for Passover. So our wines are kosher for Passover. And then the next step, in addition to that, is wines that are mevashal. Mevashal, the word itself, literally means to boil. So 50, 60 years ago, winemakers were literally boiling their wine.
Oh.
So you can imagine how much flavor that's stripping from it. And I think that's where kosher wine gets a little bit of bad perception, is because there was some pretty terrible stuff out there. But now, about 30 years ago, they settled on a process of flash pasteurization, which heats the wine up instantly using UV lighting. It takes about 2 seconds, and it goes up to 86 degrees Celsius. And then they bring it back down to room temperature in about 2 seconds. So it's almost instantaneous.
So it's like about 190 degrees Fahrenheit?
I'm going to trust you on that conversion. Yeah, I've been in the United States now for close on 3 years, and Fahrenheit is still hieroglyphics to me.
It is tricky.
So yeah, once it goes through that process, the wine is then considered mevashal in the sense that it meets the religious requirements of having being heated, but without stripping any flavor from it. So you still got that beautiful quality wine. And then the biggest advantage to a wine being mevashal is twofold. One, Gentiles like myself can pour it for Orthodox Jews, and the wines will remain kosher. But at the same time, it allows the team in the cellar to step in and start working with the wine. because when you're making a kosher wine, the biggest requirement is it has to be made by an Orthodox Jew or a rabbi in the cellar. So you can pick the fruit, you can sort, you can destem as normal, but as soon as the wine goes through the crusher and the juice is exposed to the air, only the Orthodox Jew or the rabbi can actually handle any of the equipment. So your tanks, your press, your pipes, your pumps, as soon as someone else touches that, it's no longer kosher, goes into regular wine. So really, really intricate process. But then once it's been through that flash pasteurization, then the rabbi can step back and take an oversight role and the team can come in.
Wow.
So it makes things a little bit easier from that point.
So it heats it up in 2 seconds to 86 degrees Celsius and then back down very quickly.
Yep.
So it's not matterizing, it's not cooking the wine.
Absolutely.
It's just flash pasteurizing.
Yeah, same kind of process they use on a lot of dairy products.
Okay. And if I remember right, the P on the label right there means it's kosher for Passover, and the U means that it's meshavel?
No, so the U is actually the symbol of, the U is the Orthodox Union of the United States. They're the certifying body that we go with. The P is Passover. And then on this side, we have the BD. This is the Beth Din. So there's 2 oversight bodies on our kosher wines, Beth Din of Cape Town in South Africa and the Orthodox Union of the United States. So there's a lot of oversight that goes into make sure that these are 100% legitimate kosher wines. Yeah, there's no games being played at all.
So Pinot Noir Chardonnay blend, vintage, aged 12 months on the lees, kosher certified, and under all of these organizations. And it tastes really great as well.
Phenomenal wine. And the price you pay for it is next to nothing.
Yes, indeed. It is quite lovely. I love its big bubbles, but there's like a super fine bubble structure. It's like really tight. They're not bursting like cannonballs in your mouth. And there's like this very streamlined apple quality to it and lemon, which I think is really refreshing and lovely. So
I think refreshing definitely encapsulates it for sure.
Definitely, Jewish or not, this wine is delicious and could be drunk all of the time, regardless of whether or not it's Passover. So
I agree.
Excellent.
100%.
Well, I'd love to jump now to our next wine, which is the Baksberg Pitotage Rosé here. So Pitotage, 100%, 12.5% alcohol. And this is their 2021 vintage, which is super fun to try these already. So as you can tell, I was already dipping into this wine last night and maybe for lunch today too. So it was too delicious, and so I apologize that I'm not serving a full bottle, but it was so delicious I couldn't say no earlier. So
good sign.
Yeah. So will you walk us through some of the history of what Pitotage is and why it's so unique to South Africa, what we can expect from a Pitotage rosé?
Yeah, sure. So Pitotage for me is fascinating because, as you well know, being in the industry, it's really got kind of like an unfairly bad reputation over the years, which is sad to see, but realistically, between friends, it was kind of warranted because at the end of apartheid, when the sanctions were lifted on South Africa, unfortunately, a lot of bad wine was sent out, and a big proportion of that was Pitotage. So for a good number of years, not only in the United States, but also in international markets in Europe as well, people were drinking bad Pitotage. But flash forward now, kind of like the last 10, 15 years, winemakers have really clued into how to work with it and how to use it. And kind of really, it's going to sound a bit silly now when I say it out loud, but they're no longer copy-pasting their Merlot fermentation or Cab Sav fermentation recipes onto Pitotage. They're treating it as a variety in its own right.
Yeah.
So the reason we have it and what it is it's a grape that's unique to South Africa. It was created in 1925, and the thought process behind it was everyone loves to drink Pinot Noir, but Pinot Noir doesn't really grow very well in South Africa. In fact, I think only about like 1.3% of all total plantings in South Africa is to Pinot Noir.
And so very small locations that are good for it.
Just a tiny little sliver of land where it does super, super well. But there was kind of a discussion about how can we take this sort of finesse and elegance from Pinot Noir and get it to work in South Africa. Now, there's a grape variety that does really, really well in South Africa called Cinsault, which grows very easily. It's very hardy and very high yielding. So Professor Abram Pierrot, who was a professor at Stellenbosch University in 1925, said, what if we were able to cross-pollinate these and get that finesse and elegance into the high yielding and hardiness of the Cinsault? What would happen? So he cross-pollinated these plants, and then while he was busy growing the vines, he gave it to his students as a competition to come up with a name. At the time in South Africa, Cinsault was called Hermitage, being from the Southern Rhone area. So one of his students said, well, let's just take Pinot from Pinot Noir and Tage from Hermitage, and we have Pitotage. So we landed up with this red grape, which, funnily enough, I think missed the mark a little bit on capturing that finesse and elegance. I think most of the Pitotage you come across is a little bit more full of body, a little bit more intense, but it really developed its own unique style and characteristic. And it has lovers and it has haters, but I think what excites me the most about it is it's not just planted in South Africa anymore. It's guys in California, Washington, Argentina, Chile, New Zealand that are planting the grape and giving it a shot. So hopefully in 10, 15 years time, when we're sitting back down here and having a chat, we'll be having a Pitotage tasting from around the world, which I think is very, very exciting.
Yeah, I find that most Pitotages can be the classic thing that people don't like about Pitotage could be that it smells like burning tires or burning rubber or something like that when it's harvested a little bit too early or indiscriminately. What I love about your Pitotage, and it shows very well in this Pitotage Rosé, we're not tasting the full Pitotage because I had to pick other wines that I hadn't had yet. But it's not like that. It's very elegant. It has the body and structure of a Pinot Noir with this like red earth quality and this like a little bit more rustic grip to it of the Cinsault. And I think you have such a lovely, elegant expression of Pitotage. So I'm really excited about that. And I am excited about springtime so I can drink this on a regular basis. So.
Yes, no, this is an absolute everyday wine for warmer weather for sure. The nice thing about using Pitotage in the wine is it does give it that little bit of body. So now in slightly cooler weather, it's actually quite pleasant to drink if you want to go something a little bit lighter than a heavier red that you kind of gravitate towards in the cold weather. The process that they use to determine using Pitotage on the rosé is actually kind of cool. It was a colleague of mine at the time in 2017 who was really pushing the winery to introduce a dry rosé because Baksberg historically has had a sweet rosé in-house for multiple decades. South Africans have quite a sweet tooth, so they love that. So when it came time to figuring out how we wanted to approach the dry rosé, Alicia sat down with her set team in the ownership and they did a blind tasting of a number of different South African wines. And the ones that sort of kept coming to the top were rosés made from Pitotage. So Alicia said, all right, this is great. A little bit down the road from the property, we had a satellite vineyard that had some pretty virused Pitotage wines that she didn't want to use in the main Pitotage for that year. So she said, let's give it a go. So 250 cases. And within about 2 or 3 months, it was gone because it was beautiful. It was absolutely phenomenal. So they said, all right, next year, we'll move away from that block because they ended up ripping it out to replant something else. But we moved into the main block of Pitotage, doubled the production to 500 cases. That was 18 vintage. And here we are, 2021, still capped at about 1,000 cases. So very, very small production, but a really, really phenomenal expression of what Pitotage can do outside of its usual standard variety. So again, like we were talking to just a few seconds ago, Pitotage gives you the whole package. You've got body, you've got fruit, you've got acidity, you've got long finish, you've got fantastic aromatics. It just gives you the whole party in a glass, which is exactly what you would expect from a rosé.
Yeah, this is indeed a party in a glass.
Yeah.
I like it. Well, cheers to that. What would be a classic pairing with the Baksberg Pitotage rosé with what food? What would the winery recommend?
So I'm pretty biased on that one because my personal preferred food recommendation on this wine is just more off the wine.
I like to say I like to pair it with a bigger glass and a straw.
There you go, exactly. No, but so the cheap recommendation would be like a lighter chicken dish, like a chicken salad or something. But really where this is going to shine, especially when I say this because I'm a big sushi fan, if you've got a nice sushi platter, this is really going to complement it because it's got that body and structure, but it's not overpowering. So you're not going to miss that kind of subtle flavor of the fish. So if you're having sashimi or even a lightly seared tuna, it's going to do really well with this.
Awesome. Excellent. If y'all are tuned in live, I know there's a couple people tuned in live. Ada and Alan are tuned in live here. If y'all are drinking the Pitotage Rosé, please let us know what you are tasting and enjoying with this. And if you are watching this later, just hop on into the comments and let us know what you think of the Pitotage Rosé and the sparkling. We're very curious. I am hesitant to go forward, but we've got 4 more wines to taste through. And so I am going to jump us to this next wine. And this next wine is the Family Reserve White Wine. This is a blend of Roussanne, almost 60%, just under, Sauvignon Blanc, and Chardonnay, which is a curious blend. It's like Bordeaux, Burgundy, Rhone come together in South Africa and have a baby. And I'm so thrilled with this wine. When I opened it up last night to write the review on it, I mean, I sat there for just 30 minutes just with it in a glass before I even tasted. There was just so many aromatics out of this. So I'd love to know the thought process behind why these grapes specifically blended together, maybe. Is this the first time that the Family Reserve has kind of made this specific blend? Maybe it changes every year. What's the history behind the Family Reserve white blends?
Sure. Well, I'm really glad to hear that you enjoyed it and you sat with it in the glass and gave it some time, because this is, without a doubt, my favorite wine that we produce at Baksberg. It is absolutely delicious year on, year out. Alicia does unbelievable things with this. So, to your question of the aromatics,
Makes my heart happy.
my favorite part is to pour this for people who have never heard of Roussan before, especially South Africans when they drink it, because they think, oh well, this sounds like a fancy person's drink. Like, I'm not going to enjoy it. Given they've got the kind of scowl on their face and they smell it and their eyes just open up. There, wow, what is this? It's such a beautiful nose. But no, so the kind of origins of it is, the first iteration was in 2003, and it was 100% Chardonnay. And then over the years, it kind of slowly adapted, and the Back family basically said to Alicia, listen, you have an open map to do what you want. Make the best white wine that you can with what we have on the property. So she slowly evolved it, and we have a small little portion of Roussan planted kind of in the middle of the vineyard. It's actually an interesting little block of vines that we have. I kind of refer to it as Alicia's spice rack. It's like a couple of rows of different types of varieties. I mean, there's Durif in there, there's Zinfandel, there's Grenache, there's Roussan, there's Marsanne. So she pulls from there, and I think at one point, she used the Roussan in quite a big percentage of a special blend that we did, and she saw this unbelievable potential. So she says it's her favorite one to work with. She really enjoys with it. So she started letting it do the driving portion on this one. So here we have the Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay on the 17 vintage, and on the 18, it's also Roussan led, but the Sauvignon Blanc makes way for Viognier, because each year she's just looking for what's performing better, how the wine's going to turn out. So really, really small production on this one. She only makes about 4 barrels each year, and we only bring in 25 cases of each vintage to the US. So really, really small.
Wait, I'm sorry. 25 total cases were brought into the US.
Yeah, only 25.
I bought 3 of them. I'm about to buy 3 more.
So what's that? 19 left.
Wow.
Plus we've been selling a bunch throughout Virginia. So
all of US, not just Virginia.
No. So here's the crazy part is that the company I work with, Marquee Selections, the importer of Baksberg, we have quite a nice distribution footprint across the US, but we're pretty selective with who we give to. And our distribution partner here, Well Crafted Beverage, super, super great people. Love working with them. So we had a chat with them a couple of weeks ago and said, listen, we'd like to give this a go and see what happens. And I mean, within what has it been since you tasted, a week and a half? We've taken a serious dent into the stock. So the last few days that I've been here, we've got some other people into it. So I think right now we're sitting in the cellar probably about 10 cases left. And realistically,
consider it sold.
I expect them all to come here to Virginia. So I'm really excited. So
excellent.
Yeah, if you're having this in your glass and you're drinking it, you got a bottle at home, you are one of the very few people in the US who actually does.
Fabulous. And just a shout out real quick then to Angela, Well Crafted, who brought me this wine. And this wine, me tasting it with her, was the impetus for this whole event. I was like, I want to try these wines side by side. Let's get Bryce. Let's talk about these wines. Other people need to hear about the story. So this was the one that was the impetus, and it's part of the our wine subscription pick of the month for February. So
fantastic.
Yeah,
that's really cool to hear.
So shout out to all of the people who made this happen, including Alicia. Can you actually go into us because I don't want to move on from this too fast.
No.
Can you tell us about Alicia, her background? How long has she been making wine for Baksberg?
Yeah, so Alicia has been the winemaker at Baksberg, and you'll have to fact check me on the exact year, but I think it was 2003, 2004 is when she started at Baksberg. Her husband is actually Australian, and when they got married, she returned to Australia for a few years, and we had another winemaker for a few years in between there, but they returned to South Africa, and my understanding is that Michael Back, when he heard, was on the phone straight away and begging her to come back and get her back in the cellar. So she's been at the helm for a long time. I mean, if not 2 decades, not too far off of 2 decades. So she's really got a handle on the fruit that we get, the vineyards that we got, and how the cellar works, and what she wants to express through the Baksberg wines. And Michael Back, the third generation owner, he talks about having a KISS principle at Baksberg. Keep it simple, stupid. So taking what we have on the property, making really delicious wines that are representative of their varieties at a great price point. And I think across our entire range, we really, really are able to showcase that. And that's definitely solely a result of what Alicia's able to do in the cellar with these. She's got a pretty decent sized property. I think we have about 160 acres, of which about 80 or 90 of them are planted to vine. So total production across the winery is 75,000 cases. So we count ourselves between sort of a small to medium sized producer, but most of the production comes in at the sort of lower tier level of our wines. These higher end ones, for instance, like this Family Reserve White Blend, like I mentioned, is only 4 barrels of it. So there's a lot of
and just
crossing there.
if you didn't hear that, it's 4 barrels of this, not 400, not 40. 4 barrels of this were produced.
Really, really tiny. But the kind of my favorite thing about this was when we were chatting to Alicia about the wine. We were saying like this, I mean, it's a special wine, right? That's like straight. When you're in the trade, when you're in the industry, and you drink enough wine, bad wine can't hide from you. You know what bad wine is, but you know what good wine is too. So when you smell this, you're like, wow. So we were really intrigued. So we went and had a chat with her and we asked her kind of like how she approaches it. So she'll start from the vineyards and she'll figure out what she wants to work with, what's looking particularly good. And then she brings it in. And the way she does this one is she ferments in brand new barrels. And it's about 6 months where it sits on these. But it's all vinified separately. So your Roussanne, your Sauvignon Blanc, and your Chardonnay are in separate barrels. I think we had about 3 barrels of Roussanne, 2 barrels of Chardonnay, and 1 of Sauvignon Blanc for this. But now, when it comes time to making the blend, she'll taste from each barrel and she'll pull a couple samples and she'll go to her lab and she'll sit with the beakers and figure out the percentages. But then when it comes time to actually bottling, she doesn't have a tank in the cellar that's small enough to make the blend before she bottles.
Wow.
So she has to bottle directly from barrel.
Wow.
So she says it's her favorite to work with because it's a lot of fun, but it petrifies her because for like 2 weeks after it's bottled, she's in a panic because we're not sure if it's going to be stable in the bottle or if it's going to turn to vinegar. But I mean, every single year it comes out like magic because she's a wizard, so she knows what she's doing. And you get this really, really, really beautiful wine.
To Alicia the Wizard.
To Alicia.
It is truly spectacular. I love how much it's developing and changing in the glass. I wish we had time to just do the entire hour just talking about this wine because I would be happy to do that and just seeing how much it develops. But we don't have that much time. So you got to grab a bottle or a few while it's in stock and just notice how it's coming through. I love how much the pineapple and white flowers are coming through. That acidity and that minerality stays so linear on the palate that even with all the tropical and floral notes, it does not sit heavy or cloying on your palate. It is dancing across my tongue. This is gorgeous, gorgeous wine.
No, it's phenomenal. Like I'm not going to pour it out. I'm drinking this.
Okay, all right, to drinking it.
Yeah, that beautiful line of a city that sits on the side of your tongue. It's just screaming for food. But like you can sit here and someone once told me that like a good wine experience is like reading a great book. The introduction to the book is the aroma. The plot of the story is the taste. And the climax of the book is the finish. So if you read a great story, but the ending's kind of weak, you're disappointed, but this finish just goes on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This is a wine that I definitely highly recommend not serving too cold either. It's a little too cold for me, even though it's been sitting out. I would serve this closer to like 55, 60 degrees rather than it's probably about 45, 50 now. And I think that's just going to really help create this like depth to the wine and let everything open up and breathe. So we've got 3 reds to talk about.
Cool.
We have the Pumphouse Shiraz. We have the Klein Babylon's Touraine. And we have the Family Reserve Red here. I thought we would start with the Pumphouse Shiraz and then do the 2 Bordeaux blends side by side. Does that work for you?
That sounds perfect.
Okay. Yeah. Great. I love the little story about the pump house too, being this wine is named after the little pump house that's on the winery, on the family winery. It's been there for generations.
So there was a point where a lot of the Baksberg property was not actually under vine, it was fruit orchards.
Right.
And that's where it was initially started, and it housed the irrigation for those fruit orchards. So that's where it stood. And it was, my understanding of the story is we had an intern from New Zealand in 2003 who was working in the property. And he said, oh, you guys should call this vineyard block the Pumphouse block because it's a single block of Shiraz right next to this pump house. And we get the beautiful fruit from there. And the name, the Pumphouse, you'll see that the label for this one is a black label. And on the Klein Babylon's Touraine as well, the label is black. So very originally and after many days of thought, we decided to call this range the Black Label range. We had to have a committee together to come through with the name for that. So it took a lot of thought. But they're all named after a person or a place of significance to the family or the farm. So the Pumphouse being that little iconic little concrete building right at the top. We'll chat about the Klein Babylon's Touraine when we get to it. But my favorite one, the story that I love the most is a Sauvignon Blanc that's called the John Martin Sauvignon Blanc.
John Martin?
John Martin, yeah. And John Martin was the general manager of the property with second generation owner Sydney Back. And they worked together for 30 years. And they had quite an interesting, friendly relationship. So when it came time for John to retire, Sydney said, all right, 30 years of service, you get a wine named after you. And I know that you hate Sauvignon Blanc. And I know that you don't think white wine should go into wood. So I'm going to make a barrel fermented Sauvignon Blanc and I'm going to name it after you. And it's become a house staple. People love it. They go crazy for it.
Coming from a family with 7 children, I'm the middle, and sarcasm is our love language. I really appreciate that story. That's what we would do for each other, for sure, to show each other we loved each other. So excellent. As we get into this, we'll talk about how this wine is made, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about the sustainability efforts of Baksberg, not just environmentally, but socially as well, because I know the history of social sustainability and social activism in the community stretches back far, not just recently when it's become the cool thing to do is to give back and post about it on Instagram, but the history goes back quite far in terms of giving back to the community and being a part of a community, even when it was dangerous to do so.
Exactly.
So can I hear about that?
No, with pleasure, of course. So for me, as kind of like the sales and marketing guy behind the wines, this is just like the ultimate thing to draw from, because it's so great to tell these stories and speak about it. But when you meet the Back family and you see how they live day to day and what they do, it's incredibly inspiring and humbling. So to go back, we talk about the 4 generations of ownership. Sydney Back, when he joined and he took over from his father, CL, he really strived to move from quantity to quality. He was really the one who kind of like pioneered that quality aspect to wine. And then his son Michael took over, and Michael put a lot of effort into bringing Baksberg into the front of environmental sustainability. And then when Simon took over, Simon really focused on the innovation aspect of the farm. And he really kind of draws home on the 3 pillars of sustainability that Baksberg needs to entail. So the first one that we always reference is business sustainability, because obviously you have to have a valid business to make it work. 2022, established in 1916, is that 106 years old, something like that?
So I'd say your business sustainability track record is A+.
I feel like they got that one down pat, right? Then we move on to environmental sustainability, which you mentioned at the beginning. Baksberg is certified carbon neutral, was the first South African winery and only one of 3 in the world at the time to have that. And a number of really cool initiatives.
The first South African winery to be certified carbon neutral?
Yeah.
I think I knew that at one point, but I had forgotten it, so that's great to know.
Yeah, and that was in 2006. So Michael's always kind of been at the forefront of this. It's quite funny because he'll tell stories about how people will, they'll see him do something and they'll say, Michael, you can't do that. That's ridiculous. Why do you? And then 5 years later, they'll be like, oh, wait, actually, we probably should have done that when you did it. So there's a number of really cool initiatives that take place on the farm to help us offset our carbon emissions. The biggest one being tree planting. So we have thousands of trees planted every year, both on the property as well as in the local community. And most kind of perception when you think about tree planting, you think about replenishing oxygen into the atmosphere, into the ozone. But what people often don't really think about is South Africa is quite warm, right? Now, if you're a child and you're in school and recess comes around and you have to go outside and there's no shade, recess sucks real quick.
Yeah.
So planting trees creates shade, which enables a really healthy environment for kids to go outside and enjoy their schooling, which is great. It's something we don't often put with that. In addition to the tree planting practice that we have on the farm, we also have a number of smaller initiatives whereby the vineyard workers and even the owners themselves don't drive around in super fancy big pickup trucks. We have these like small little beaten up things that have dents on the side from reversing into vineyard poles and like the little mistakes that you have. We have LED lighting wherever possible through the cellar. We have as many skylights as we can in the roof of the cellar for natural lighting. In the fermentation cellar itself with the stainless steel tanks, the cooling jackets that you have to kind of retain that fermentation temperature, we don't chill those, we don't cool that down using electricity. We have a piece of equipment on the property called a biomass boiler, which burns wood chips from a local sawmill. And in a heat exchange process is able to chill down that water to keep the fermentation test. We don't rely on the grid for that. And then probably the most important thing that I think, especially as we kind of move forward in today's climate, is the water management program that we have on the farm. We have a number of different dams. Actually, the biggest dam that we have at the top was the largest man-made dam at the time when it was built in the Western Cape. So it has a pretty serious dam wall that has to be audited once a year to check for structural soundness, because if that was to break, there'd be a bit of a problem down below.
Yeah.
But we catch the runoff water from the Siemensberg Mountain on that, which we'll talk about now, the mountain in a little bit. And in addition to catching the runoff water, sorry, we also have one of the largest blueberry operations in South Africa.
Blueberries.
Yeah, these are super duper high quality blueberries that are grown in their own individual pots and monitored with special water meters. And we have a farm manager to take care of all of this. It's very, very intricate. But all of these blueberries live under giant nursery covers, and it's quite large. So if you think of your kind of total surface area that rain would fall onto and then wash off, the thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of liters of water that you would lose to just runoff every year is huge. So Michael Back installed a gutter system around these blueberry tunnels to catch that water, which we then pump into our dams.
Wow.
So then in years like 2016, 17, and 18, when you're reading in the New York Times about Cape Town approaching day zero, where there literally won't be any water and vineyards are dying, we were one of the fortunate farmers to be able to actually pull from our own water reserves to irrigate our vineyards to save them, essentially. Yeah.
Wow. So I think you have business sustainability and environmental sustainability then down pat, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So then the third one, like you mentioned, is the social sustainability element. And this is where I really realized that I'm a horrible human because I'm not doing enough, right? During apartheid, it was illegal for Black and colored students to attend certain schools and get a higher level of education that a lot of white people had access to. So Michael Back and his wife Jill would hold night classes in the town of Klopmuts, which is the local center right next to where the farm is, and give these kids access to education that they were legally not allowed to have. So these guys were putting their sort of livelihoods at risk, because if they were caught doing that, they could go to jail. So eventually when apartheid was ended and repealed, they didn't do the night classes anymore. But instead of just stopping there, they formed a scholarship fund for family and friends of Baksberg, but not necessarily just restricted to them. It was also spread word of mouth for people to get access and funding to attend tertiary education, so university and college, with the only requirement being that the student needs to pass all their classes. So they would come, they would chat to Michael, they would explain what they wanted to study, and then he would then fund their tertiary education. So all in all, since that has ended, it now amounts to more than 100 years of tertiary education has been sponsored by the Back family for people to attend tertiary education.
So wait, not just like people who worked on the estate or anything like that.
No.
Anyone in the community go to Baksberg and say, "This is what I want to study," and as long as they pass their classes, it was funded by Baksberg.
Yep. Yeah.
I just want to buy all of the wine when I hear this story. It is really special to think about the people who have given back so much.
No, it's outstanding. I mean, the thing with South Africa is you have to factor in our history. It's terrible history, to be sure, but you have to factor in, we have to make sure we're doing what we can to allow everyone who was disadvantaged and prejudiced against to kind of move forward and catch up. And one of the biggest things that they've done that I thought was the most amazing is, because of our standard of living in South Africa, it's very mismatched and it is quite low. And oftentimes, if you're an agricultural worker, your housing is attached to your job. So if you are working on a farm, you're given accommodation. But if you want to change your job, you want to leave and go somewhere else, you lose your housing. It's a big, big problem. So in the late 90s, 1998, I think specifically was the year, the Back family said that they wanted to do something about this. So they portioned off a piece of their land and they got their laborers involved and they said, listen, we're going to make a range of wines. We're going to call it Freedom Road. It was based off of Nelson Mandela's book, A Long Walk to Freedom. And they produced this wine and they sold it to a retailer in the UK. They then took the profits from that wine and gave it to their laborers and assisted them in getting building supplies to build 18 houses on this portion of the Baksberg estate. Those houses are still there today. When you drive on your way to the property, there's a road, it's called Freedom Road, and there's these 18 houses. And once they were built, the title deeds of this property were handed over to the workers as their land, their house, their property.
Wow.
And within a few years, a number of those families left Baksberg. And immediately people turned around to Michael and Simon and said, well, listen, guys, what have you done? Like, you've just given away this stuff for free. And Michael said, well, this is the whole point, was to create that stepping stone, to move out of blue collar into white collar, to take this title deed, this collateral, go to a bank, get loans to help yourself move forward. So they were thrilled with the outcome of it. And the real cool thing was the recognition that we saw for this. And the first bottle of Freedom Road that came off the bottling line was actually signed by Nelson Mandela and is on display at the tasting room today.
Wow.
So wonderful, wonderful.
Wow.
Again, beautiful stories.
And so are houses still being built, or the houses, the 18 original houses?
That was the original house.
Okay.
So that was the project that we've done. But it's definitely something that hasn't been taken off the table for sure. And it's definitely something that they're considering doing because unfortunately we are, and my maths will give me away here, we're a good 25, 30 years away from this, but there's still a lot of catching up to do. And there's a lot of work. So the effort never ends. And we want to make sure we continue to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that story so much. Often in this industry, it's very much like the laborers and the owners. There's a dichotomy, and to allow a space for upward mobility is really incredible. So and admirable. So that is awesome. Well, I'd love to. That Shiraz was delicious, by the way. I'd love to get into our two Bordeaux style blends. So we have the Klein Babylon's Touraine. This is Cabernet Merlot base, and then we have the Family Reserve Red, which is Cab Malbec and Merlot.
Yep.
I'd love to try the Klein's Babylon first.
So
or what would you prefer?
Weirdly enough, let's do the Family Reserve.
I like weird.
It's 2015. It's drinking a little bit softer than the Klein Babylon's Touraine at the moment, which is a 16 vintage. And the reason I say weirdly enough is because the winemaking process on this wine is really cool. So essentially what it is, it's a barrel selection of our best Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot or Malbec or Petit Verdot or Shiraz. Alicia will go through the set and she'll taste. So every year the recipe changes. And Alicia will go through, she'll pick her best barrels, she'll make the blend, and then she puts it back into barrel for a further 6 months. So it's got extended aging. So you read that on a piece of paper and you think, wow, so if I bite into this table and I drink the wine, they're going to taste the same, right? Because that's how much wood is on it. But I don't know what happens. You just get, and I was reading your tasting note, you've got it spot on. These like really velvety, smooth, like fine grained tannins that create this lovely lush mouthfeel to it with a finish that just sings. And this, for whatever reason, that extended age of that final complete blend in the barrel just brings everything home together. That makes it really, really wonderful. And 2015 was a hallmark vintage in South Africa. And in a country that doesn't really suffer too much from vintage variation, to say that, it means it was pretty stellar.
Yeah. How long was it aged in oak? I'm sorry.
So 12 months initially as separate varieties, and then blended, and then a further 6 months. So 18 months total.
Great.
Yeah.
And 6 months blended all together.
Correct.
Yeah, I could just, again, just like the white, the Family Reserve white, I could just sit here and just smell this for the rest of the night.
Yeah.
I think we've got a couple questions here. Let's see here. As this was a 2017, we're talking about the Family Reserve white blend. When was it brought to the U.S.? And to answer that, it literally just came in. So this was a brand new release, correct?
2017 vintage is the first one in the United States.
So yes, the 2017 vintage just brought to the U.S. and the first one brought to the U.S. of this. Yes, they say the education support does make you want to purchase the wine. I fully agree. And if you're tuning in live on Facebook, I'm sorry I can't read the comments from all the way over there. My phone is very far away, but I will be answering those questions. So just make sure they go in the comments, and I'll hop online and answer the questions after the live video goes on. So thank you all for tuning in live. And if you're tuning in afterwards, still pop the questions in the comments, and I'll make sure I get the answers. If I don't know the answer, I'm going to reach out to you, Bryce, and
sounds good.
We'll get you on there. So I love how much toffee and coffee and roasted espresso and dried currants. This wine just pulls you in. I wish it were 30 degrees outside. Not really, but just because this is the wine I would just want to sink onto a couch with, and no music, even no TV. This is the entertainment, just seeing this wine develop in the glass. So it is gorgeous.
I love your description of the notes that you're getting in the flavor profiles, because what I'm really enjoying about these wines at the moment, both the Family Reserve and the Klein Babylon's Touraine and our regular Cabernet Sauvignon under the normal label, is, sorry, I'm going to waffle now. I hope you'll forgive me.
No, great.
South Africa finds itself in this kind of really strange sort of no man's land between New World producing nation and Old World producing nation. And technically, we're a New World wine country, but we've been making wine since 1659. So, I mean, before the United States was a country. And we should actually give a cheers to this. On the 2nd of February, which was Wednesday, I think, was the birthday of South African wine. Yeah.
That is amazing.
Yeah,
Cheers to
super
South
cool.
Africa.
Cheers.
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
South African wine country. Yes.
And the reason we know that is because the governor of the Cape at the time actually wrote in his diary on the 2nd of February, 1659, praise be to God, for today is the first day that wine is made from South African grapes.
Wow.
So we're able to celebrate that every year. And I think as we're growing as a country, and I mean, in the wine trade, when you look at this kind of new world, old world dichotomy, it's often very easy to describe new world nations as wines that are Bordeaux-like or Burgundian-like or Rhone in style. I love these cab-based blends because they are so South African. They are 100% South African when you smell them, when you taste them, when you drink them. I don't need to say that, like, if you've had wine from Napa, you'll enjoy this. Or if you've had wine from Barossa, you'll enjoy it. It's like, this is the Paarl side of the Simonsberg Mountain, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Malbec. This is what it is. It's just such a really great representation of it.
And I truly do love that about Baksberg is it doesn't ever seem like they're trying to be anyone else other than who they are. So since you brought up the Paarl side of the Simonsberg Mountain, Stellenbosch is on the other side. What climatic differences or soil differences or exposition differences are there between Paarl and Stellenbosch? Because South African doesn't have as much representation as I'd like on wine shelves and wine lists everywhere, though I'm trying to change that every day. New South African wines on the shelves here at Vinoculture. But if they are apparent on the shelves, it's usually from Stellenbosch. And so that is the one region that I'd say is more recognizable for Americans. Tell us about Paarl and what makes Paarl so unique.
Absolutely. So it's actually really crazy that Stellenbosch is now, of course, the darling child of South Africa. They've done really well and they produce phenomenal wines. On top of that, it's a beautiful, beautiful little town. So anyone who ever goes to South Africa, I highly recommend going to Stellenbosch. It's phenomenal. But weirdly enough, 30 or 40 years ago, Paarl was probably more renowned worldwide than Stellenbosch was. So we're really working hard to kind of bring it back into recognition because it is a fantastic wine growing region. Some of the bigger names in South Africa are actually sitting on the Paarl side of Stellenbosch. So geographically, when we look at it, what I think sets the two apart is if you have you look at South Africa on a map, you look at the Western Cape in particular, where 95% of the wine production in the country happens. You see Table Mountain, you see Cape Town, you see Table Bay Harbor, and you see False Bay. Now, you have a lot of coastal breezes that come off there and they kind of wash into Stellenbosch. And Stellenbosch is surrounded by a beautiful set of mountains. You have Simonsberg Mountain, you have Stellenboschberg, and then you have Helderberg. So it creates this really great catchment that kind of like retains these coastal breezes. Now, on the other side is Paarl and Franschhoek. Now, those sort of coastal winds are buffeted a little bit, so it's slightly warmer on our side. So the harvest generally starts earlier. But what I find is the real great difference between the two is, my personal opinion is we have more uniform ripening on red varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon, like Merlot, like Shiraz. So sometimes in Stellenbosch, you'll come across red blends that they tend to have a little bit of sort of herbaceous character that runs through, a little bit of green flavors, which are beautiful in their own right, but not always appealing to everyone. So on the Paarl side, we don't get that. And I think it's really evident in the wines we've tasted tonight. Don't fight with that at all. We've just got beautiful, lush, dark, lush fruit. And it's really indicative of the fruit we can grow there, rather than any kind of manipulation in the cellar to try and save what you struggled with in the vineyard. So potentially a little bit easier for a winemaker's country, not so much intervention in the cellar to fix whatever problems you fought in the vineyard, which I really enjoy.
All the pyrazines are there's none of that green pepper, none of that eucalyptus at all. There is some peppery spice, but it's more refined and fully ripened. So all those pyrazines are fully ripening on this blend here. What about water? So all of the drainage from the Simonsberg Mountain is coming down, and that is the primary way that we're able to irrigate the vineyards?
Yeah, so irrigation is often quite a sticky topic between people, depending on how you want to do it. What you'll find is there are certain regions in South Africa who will do a lot of dry farming. They don't want to irrigate. Other people prefer drip irrigation. And then in much higher yielding areas, they'll actually have like full-on sprays where they'll water their vineyards. So we use drip irrigation on the Baksberg property, but that's as a result of us being able to catch that kind of free-flowing water off the Simonsberg. But really what it comes down to is South Africa sits in the perfect kind of wine growing latitude. When you look at longitude and latitude, if you look at where the European wine growing countries are, if you look at kind of Oregon, Washington, California, we sit on that parallel, but in the southern hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
So very wet and cold winters, warm, dry summers. So perfect for vines. They can really rest and shut down in winter and come to life in the summer. So we really, in essence, are relying on that winter rainfall. So now with climate change, as we're getting less rainfall in winter and less rainfall overall, it becomes a bit of a problem. So whether or not we're sitting on the side of a mountain and being able to catch that kind of rainwater off, if it's not raining, we're going to be in trouble nonetheless. So climate change is very real. It's very important to deal with, but I think that just tracks back to making sure that that environmental sustainability pillar is in place and everyone is doing what they need to do to make sure that we don't land up in more hot water than we already are in.
Literally hot water, the oceans. It's always so fascinating when you think about anywhere in the world. If I could name a place, a wine country place that is on the forefront of environmental sustainability, South Africa is always on the top of my list. And that's why I say, if I had $1 million, I would invest in South African wines because they're doing the right things. And again, also doing the 3 pillars of full sustainability, including that social sustainability aspect that's becoming more of a thing, specifically in South Africa, that I see that is really inspiring. So can we talk about some of the challenges that we face in the wine world? I know there's a whole series out now about climate change in the wine world, but I'd like to hear from your perspective. What are the challenges specifically that we're going to face in the next just even 3 to 5 years as we battle climate change for this one area, Paarl, South Africa?
Sure. So I mean, I'll speak to it from how we're addressing it. Is the biggest thing is you see these kind of gradually warming temperatures, and we talk about this area of South Africa being the perfect wine growing belt of longitude and latitude. If it's at the specific temperature that we're currently sitting at, yes. So Cab Sav and Shiraz does phenomenally well, and Merlot does phenomenally well. But if that temperature increases by 1 or 2 degrees, wow, now we're in trouble, right? There's a big problem in terms of what's going to grow, especially if you think of cooler climate areas like where they're growing Pinot Noir or Chardonnay or Cabernet Franc. 1 or 2 degrees different. If they don't have Cab Sav and Merlot planted there now, they're in deep trouble because that stuff's going to be overripe. It's not going to ripen correctly. It's going to be all out of whack. So in the 50s and 60s and 40s, when the South African industry was kind of coming more into sort of more quality recognition, producing better wines, there was a lot of market-driven plantings. So a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon, a lot of Merlot, a lot of Chardonnay, a lot of Sauvignon Blanc, internationally known varieties. In reality, we have a serious Mediterranean climate, and we do better with Rhone-style varieties and almost to a degree some Italian and Greek varieties. So there's a big movement amongst younger winemakers to actually get out into the vineyards, do soil samplings, do climate analysis, and plant what grows well. And this harks back to the family reserve white, which is Roussanne-led, which Alicia initially started crafting off a very small portion of Roussanne that we had on the farm. But we ended up planting 4 hectares of Roussanne wines, as well as a number of other cool varieties that are drought resistant, because you need to be thinking ahead, especially in the wine game. You can't be thinking 1 or 2 years down the line. This is a 5, 10, 15, 100-year game that you need to play. So you make sure that you're planting the correct vines to accommodate that change, which is sadly inevitable at this stage. So making sure that you are managing your water correctly, you're managing your vineyards correctly, and growing the wines that you should be growing, not just because people want to drink Merlot or Pinot Noir.
Yeah, just like in Bordeaux, they're now approving these Portuguese red varieties. Yeah. Whether or not people are going to use them, or maybe they'll use them and just not declare that they're using them. But I'm very curious to see how many wine regions will start changing the varieties that they're really getting out there. And smaller producers, more eclectic, boutique producers have, I think, the chance to do that with a little bit more freedom than some of the larger producers do. So I'm really excited about that change. Not the reason for it, but I'm excited about seeing some other grape varieties out there. There's thousands of grapes to try in the world. Why be monogamous and just drink the same stuff? So
I think that's one area where South Africa is incredibly lucky, is that we don't have something like the DOC or the AOP in France controlling what can be planted, where South African winemakers have the freedom for trial and error.
Yeah.
So we should see some super exciting things coming out of there soon.
And I think that's what makes South Africa so special. Almost like Chile, they've been making wines just about as long, but the climate in both South Africa and Chile, a little bit cooler, than say some of the other New World, California, even Washington State. So you don't have the cloak of tradition and wine laws on you. So you have some innovative practices, but a cooler climate and a little bit more restraint usually in the wines coming from these areas. So I like that Goldilocks in between old world and new world.
Yes,
So
I like that. I'm going to use that.
all right, great. So let's go on with the last few minutes that we have here to try the Klein Babylon's Turin.
Cool.
Now, you got to help us out with this label. Klein's Babylon Turin. What's going on with this label? What is the naming?
All right. So, Klein Babylon's Turin literally translates to Little Tower of Babylon.
Okay.
So, we were talking about how South African wine has been made since 1659. And what happened was when South Africa was established as a way station, really, from the Dutch East India Company when they were traveling from Europe, coming round the continent of Africa to get to India to trade spices, because this was before the Suez Canal was available and it didn't have the notoriety from last year's extravaganza with the ever given stuck in the middle. So it used to travel, and it was too far a distance. So what would happen is sailors would suffer from scurvy. So they needed a way station to set up shop, and they had their priorities in order. So they planted vineyards right away, got the wine going, and they arrived and they settled. They started in Cape Town, so the initial vineyards were planted. I think actually the first vineyards were probably planted right there, kind of where Cape Town CBD is now. I could be wrong on that,
right
but
on
I
the
think
coast,
that's where they were. Yeah. And then they started moving inland, and then as they came through Stellenbosch and went through these mountains that I was describing earlier, and they kind of came into where Paul is today now. Right next to where our farm is this little rocky outcrop that they kind of said reminded them of drawings of the Tower of Babylon. So they named this property Babylon's Turin, which means Tower of Babylon. And then after a few years, a little piece of this farm was actually sold off, and it was Little Tower of Babylon, plain Babylon's Turin. And that property is the historic farm name of where Baksberg is situated today.
Wow.
So the wine was given that name as kind of like a tribute to it. It was also the first sort of icon wine that we produced. It's the wine we've had the longest. We have bottles of this dating back to the 70s in the cellar. And the real treat that I've been able to have through working there was having access to tasting some of these older vintages and seeing how they're doing over decades of aging and the purity of fruit that they hold. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of older wine. I find myself quite prejudiced to it, but being able to taste these guys that don't have that kind of like leather, dusty note that older wines get, it's just pure fruit with these like really soft, elegant tannins. It was a really, really great experience to be able to see that and see what quality wine does after multiple years of aging. So it's definitely become sort of a frame of reference for people who know Baksberg. They'll come back time and time again to the farm requesting the Klein Babylon's Turin. It's one that a lot of international visitors know about. So it's a real treat to have it here in the US. And it's definitely a testament to the classic varieties of Paul. So 60% Cabernet Sauvignon, 40% Merlot, pretty much bang on every single year. This one between us, because we're friends, there's a little bit of Petit Verdot in there.
I saw that on the website, yeah.
Alicia likes to use it for upliftment of color and aromatics, just to give something else. But it really is the hallmark wine that we produce, and it's such a treat to drink it.
Well, I apologize in advance then. I've been calling it Klein Babylon's Turin this whole time, so it's Klein.
Klein, yeah.
All right.
Klein means little or small, yeah.
Well, it's Friday, and this wine has been our wine of the week all week, and the entire time I've been calling it Klein Babylon's Turin. So I apologize for that for everybody who I have mispronounced this wine to. It is Klein Babylon's Turin. So I love how like rustic the fruit is and the tannins are. It's like very bright, very vibrant. There's just so much going on. It's super expressive. This is not trying to be the uber composed, elegant, older sister. This is like, I'm out center of the dance floor having fun.
Exactly. Yeah. Super big, super bold, super brash. But I don't know why. I was actually very curious. I need to Google if today is on the biodynamic calendar. If it's maybe a flower day for this wine for me today is just, it's on fire. The acidity that you get on the side of the tongue is just like, bring me steak right now. I will devour it. It's phenomenal.
Absolutely. I think this is like every day, all day, drink this wine. This is like, I want an occasion to like think about it. This requires a little bit more thought, the family reserve, but this is every day, all day. So
it's a beautiful one.
Been really impressed with all of these wines. And so we've got 5 minutes left. Is there anything we didn't cover, anything that you love talking about in terms of Baksberg and the history and what the winery is doing that we didn't discuss today?
I think we hit all the key points that I love to talk about. Maybe we can wrap it up with a cool story that I found out about only after having worked there for about a year and a half. I was reading through some old articles, and there's a famous South African wine writer, and I feel terrible because I actually can't remember her name right now, but she penned an article on the sort of history of Sydney Back. So the second generation owner of Baksberg, the one who kind of moved them into the higher quality range of wines. And she wrote that she had immigrated from Europe. She arrived in Paarl. She was actually writing for a newspaper at the time, and she was going to be the wine journalist. And at that time, the industry was pretty small, so word got around this new girl was in town. So Sydney Back apparently phoned her up one day and said, "Listen, you need to come to Baksberg. I would like to see you." Very ominous.
We need to talk.
Yeah. So she climbed into her car and drove to the farm, and she got to the sort of front entrance of the wine, into the parking lot. She got out, and Sydney met her there, and she said apparently it was in an old Volkswagen Beetle, and they climbed in there. So now I want to fact check the story because I've driven up to the top of the farm, and I don't know if a Beetle could get there, but this is what she said. They got into the Beetle, and he drove her up to the top of the farm. Didn't really say much on the drive, just took her up right to the top where that dam is that I was telling you about, and let her step out, and he said to her, "You need to understand now, in everything that you write going forward, I want you to stop here and just look. And there's this beautiful vista over the Franschhoek Valley, the Franschhoek Mountains. You've got the Simonsberg right behind you. You can see the Stellenboschberg peeking out over there. You've got the beautiful Drakenstein Mountains in the city of Paarl." So Paarl translated means pearl, and Drakenstein translated means dragonstone, because there's this kind of series of bald rocks just outside of Paarl, and when it rains, they get a very nice, like, shimmery glitter to them. So the Dutch were thinking about dragon eggs and pearls, which is where it gets named. So he said to her, "Every time you write something, you need to think about where we are and just take note that we wouldn't be able to do what we do without this." And they got back in the car, drove her back down, and sent her on her way.
That was it. Just a 30-second conversation.
Yeah. And she said it was just such a profound moment, but she really took it to heart, and it really helped her kind of appreciate the fact that when we deal with this, we talk about those 3 pillars of sustainability, the country that we're in, the beautiful land that we have, and the lovely kind of collection of people that South Africa has, being the Rainbow Nation. You have to factor all of that in when you drink South African wine. And it's not just about what you have in the glass. For me, wine has always been about 60% environment and 40% product. And when you're on the side of the Simonsberg Mountain, and you can see what she saw on that day with Sydney Back, the stuff becomes a whole lot more tasty.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cheers to that.
Cheers.
That is excellent. If you said that 60% environment, 40% product, I'd switch that around and be like 30, 30, 30 people, environment, and product.
I like
because
that. Yeah.
if it weren't for the intentionality that it takes of winemakers to do the right thing and the right way, then we wouldn't have wines like this. So to Baksberg, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
For your time and for your expertise in talking about these. I look forward to drinking lots more Baksberg, and I look forward to sharing Baksberg with you all. And let us know what you think about these wines in the comments. And if you don't have these wines in your glass, if you're watching the video, come into the wine shop where you'll find lots of Baksberg wines for you to taste in the future. So cheers and thanks.
Cheers. Thank you so much, Kara.
We'll sign off now. So.
Sounds good.